You ready? You're listening to the Real Pineapple Podcast Network. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for listening, or good afternoon, depending on where you're listening to this. This is the Real Pineapple. This is your humble host, Hunter. Hope you're having a great week so far. I'm really excited. I have a chance right now to talk to writer, producer, director, award-winning director for short films such as On the Whistle, Good Sam, and Expectations. He's also founder of the Hartford Film Company, pardon me, and he went ahead and just directed a film that you'll be hearing a review for along with this review. His first feature film in Midas, TJ Noel-Sullivan. TJ, how you doing today?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on.
Seriously, thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it. So I am always honest with my guests, and I am very lucky to watch a lot of random stuff. And I will say I watched your film yesterday morning with my coffee, and I absolutely dug it. I was thoroughly impressed. I there were some twists I really didn't expect, some turns that I was like, oh, that's awesome. And actually were no spoiling, but where things ended up, I actually wasn't expecting, which is probably the biggest compliment I can give you. So, since this is your first feature film, how did you kind of attack this from day one? Like, did you know what your subject matter was? Like, kind of talk to me about your process.
Sure. Yeah. So I had the idea for a heist film that kind of goes off the rails and becomes a little bit more than the standard heist film. I had an idea for that back in 2018, kind of the general structure and this idea of they're robbing a company, and in the process of robbing the company, they uncover something that takes a slightly darker twist. But really, it wasn't until in 2020 I decided to set the film in Hartford, which is my hometown and is also the health insurance capital of the world. And as soon as that happened, it kind of all clicked together to go, oh, they're robbing a health insurance company, and their motivation for it is that the main character's mom has been denied coverage by this company. And so once that all came together, that really helped make it happen. And obviously, there was still quite a bit of process. There was, over a year and a half of getting notes and revising and all that kind of stuff. But I think that was really the light bulb moment for me where I go, oh yeah, I can see what this film is, and I believe that this film is worthy of investing what ended up being quite a couple of years of my life to make it happen and bring it out to the world.
So since you said that you had it back in 2018, obviously we all went through COVID and everything. Were there was there ever a point where it was kind of on the back burner? Like how did you kind of get through that writing? Because I know for myself, it was like putting out content during COVID was kind of its own like separate, kind of separate thing as far as mental capacity. So were you still working on the script through COVID and lockdown and everything, or?
Yeah, so what happened? I had this idea for the concept back in 2018, but it really was just like I'd done a beat sheet and it hadn't really clicked for me. And in November of 2020, so we were like still in the COVID period, and my days were very free. I kind of said, you know what? We've had our initial run with the COVID stuff. Time is still feels a little weird, but I really want to dive into writing my next project. And that's when I pulled back out that beat sheet and said, okay, what can I do with this? How can I turn this into the film I want to make? And honestly, what was really nice about COVID in some ways was I had so much time. And so when that light
Yeah.
bulb clicked for me, I wrote the draft for the first draft in about 3 days.
Oh, shit.
Because I
Okay.
suddenly was like, oh, I know what this movie is, and for the next 3 days, I have nothing on my calendar, nothing, stopping me from doing anything. Versus now, I think about that, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm lucky to have like an hour or two each day to write because
Fair.
now the real world has picked back up. Um, and so there were elements. I think one of the challenges of COVID was once I had this thing, I could send it to people virtually, but also I'm such a big believer in like connecting with people in person and having those conversations. That's
Same.
such a part of my creative process. And so I think that's what kind of slowed down the revision process a little bit, is I needed to wait for the world to open back up and be able to, send it to people, meet people at parties, talk about it, send it to them, get their notes, that kind of thing. I think that was a really important piece of polishing it to where it got to. Um, but I will say that for actually, sitting down and writing a script, I miss the opportunity to just have 3 days of unencumbered writing.
Fair. So since you talked about getting the first revision knocked out in 3 days, which is insane, by the way, because one of the things I liked about the script so much is how punchy it was in terms of punchlines, in terms of the friend trio that we go ahead and meet in here, because I think it's just kind of actually I'm gonna end up watching it again just because I know I missed stuff because I actually didn't have my subtitles on, but twofold on that. I know you had your concept. How do you kind of tackle the script? Do you kind of go like, all right, I want to get like my plot, like from point A to point B. I know where I want to end up. Do you start writing dialogue first? Do you write your ending? Like, how do you kind of approach the script?
Yeah, so I typically will kind of write out my beat sheet. And for this one, it was, when I had that light bulb moment, I pulled out my notebook. I really mapped out the entire film beat by beat. And then I'll jump into writing it. And this one I think was fun because the characters and their voices, especially that trio, kind of came to me pretty early on. And so I kind of found who these three characters were and had a lot of fun writing those scenes, writing those interactions, and finding both. Oftentimes, I would know, okay, I need to go from point A to point B, but along the way, I would have fun finding the ways that those characters were going to interact with each other to get there. Um, and so, I will say definitely that the script made some. There were definitely significant changes between that first draft and our shooting draft, but the overall structure stayed pretty much the same. The when things happen and like where in the film things happen, that was pretty consistent.
Okay.
So our three main characters stayed pretty consistent throughout. Like those three characters were in the very first draft of the script, and who they are as characters stayed pretty consistent. I will say the big time that changed really is once you actually get into casting, and I think that's such a fun process of having what the characters you've written on the screen. And then, I mean, I'll say, Laquan, especially when I initially wrote Ricky, Ricky was going to be this like 6'3", really strong, muscular guy, like kind of a different element of like how he charms and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I saw the self tape for Laquan. Laquan submitted a self tape, and I was like, he has the energy, and he doesn't match the paper description of what Ricky is, but he has the essence of who Ricky is. And so it is fun to have those moments where, you think you've been working on a script for a year and a half, thinking you know who this character is, and then you actually see the actor and go, no, that's who the character is.
So I wanted to talk to you about that specifically because I thought casting wise, I thought you nailed what the essence for each character. And obviously if you don't get Ricky right, it all kind of falls, it all kind of falls apart. But to your point, I thought Laquan did an incredible job of nailing that like kind of natural charisma that someone attempting this would need to be able to have. And even in those I'll go back to that in a second, but I want to give you props for one scene in particular because there's a scene where he's talking to Claire, who is the daughter of the big CEO that he ends up working for, and they have this conversation about privilege. And I was real like, and once the conversation started, I'm always kind of like, all right, director, let's see how you're, let's see what angle you're going to kind of take on this. And the angle that you took, I thought was so profound without being preachy, but at the same time to your audience, letting them know like this is a thing that occurs, and this is a perspective he's more than justified in having. Was that the hardest scene to write? Just because you're kind of like, oh, I'm dealing with all these elements, and I kind of want to make sure I check all my boxes, or
So it's really funny that scene. So the theme that you're taught that plays out in that scene, which is a theme that kind of actually tapped into from the very beginning. So one of the things when I graduated college, one of the big questions that popped up is I had some friends who went off and tried to get the best paycheck possible. And I had other friends who went to go work at nonprofits and do other things that they found really fulfilling. And I remember that dialogue playing out of, the people working at nonprofits looking at people, working at hedge funds making six figures right out of college and going, well, you're ruining the world, you're profiting off of
Yeah.
all these horrible things. And oftentimes it was the people who had came from wealthier financial backgrounds that were pointing those fingers, and the people who said, hey, no, I'm making this money so that I can help send my younger sister to school, or I can give back to my parents for all they did for me. They were the ones that were seeking that money. And so that was a theme that we had been talking about, from the earliest kind of rehearsals with the cast and crew. Was like that was an underlying theme that kind of played out throughout. But that scene in particular is really funny because as we were shooting this movie, I think it was about a week into filming, Laquan and Lucy, who play Ricky and Claire, after we shot one day, they said, TJ, we've been kind of rehearsing the scene and it's not feeling right. And the scene, it was a different scene. The scene did not play out like that. And they were like, it's not really feeling right. And we went and rehearsed it a couple times. And I was like, yep, you know what? You're right. This isn't working. And so in the middle of shooting, we ripped up that scene.
Oh,
And
wow.
really, the three of us, like together, kind of said, okay, let's get at the heart of what this is and let's, come up with that scene. And so that scene is actually the only scene in the movie that was not in the shooting script. Like,
Wow.
there was a moment for
Okay.
that scene, but we did that differently. And I have to give a lot of credit to both Lucy and Laquan because, we in the course of the days leading up to that, we rewrote that scene and kind of had it. But as we were there, I was also like, you guys have been a part of this. You're now, who these characters are, your characters. So also feel free to improv. And so I would say at least a third of that scene is the two actors kind of improving and
That's
knowing what we were
wild.
trying to say, but finding the right thing. And I'll say as a director, that's kind of scary because, we're shooting a film, there's limited time. And so sometimes when you improv, like it doesn't go where it needs to go, it doesn't work, but sometimes it does. And so it was scary to kind of be in the moment and go, okay, I have faith that this can be cut together into the scene that it needs to be because it is such an important scene for kind of paying off the last third of the movie. Um, but so having that faith to say, yep, I believe that these actors who know their characters so well, you know, and they're adding something when they're improvising, and it's not every single take isn't perfect, but the sum of all the parts is going to work. And that was a really, I think, a learning experience for me as a director, but I think it worked out.
So, okay, so I want to dig a little bit on that because one of the questions I always love kind of debating with directors is that give and take between, you have confidence in your script, you know what the script is, you know where you want to go, but then you want to give your actors and actresses a bit of a sandbox to play in and let the scene kind of, as someone who's done shorts, like where do you find that balance with this being your first film? Because I'm sure that alone is something that's like a moving target when it comes to different scenes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that you also find in shooting, which can be scary because, we do rehearsals with actors and things, but it's really once we get to set and you get a feeling of, oh, which actors like to improv. And I'll say on our set, Eric Bloomquist, who plays Tom, he came in and he really just wanted to kind of throw in some ad libs, throw in some improv. And I think
Okay.
he helped set the tone because we were shooting some of his scenes right off the bat. And, typically the rhythm we fell into is I'd say, give me the first couple takes as written. And then, my catchphrase became, all right, have fun with this take. And that was giving permission to, you know, whether that was performance wise, if they wanted to go a different direction, if they wanted to throw in some ad libs or some improv, whatever that was. Um, and I think that really became freeing for the actors because, again, I would get them to where I wanted to get them in two, three, four takes. And then I'd say, all right, let's just do one more, have fun with this one. And oftentimes, some of their best performances came in those takes because they had something that they had tapped into that they really wanted to bring out. And I think, I see my job as a director to try and get them in the ballpark of where I want them to be, get them to the right ballpark, and
Yeah.
then let their talent do what needs to happen. Um, and so, yeah, it was a learning process for me for sure. I think this was definitely the most improv that I've ever had on one of my sets. But it was in part because we just kind of built this trust over the course of a feature. I'd say in the first couple of days there was less improv, but over the course of 4 weeks, you build this trust with your actors. I think they also get a feel for you of like, what's going to work, what's not going to work. And so that was really key in making it all come together.
When it came to so one thing I really want to shout out as well is I thought the visual style, like there are these moments where like the scenes are kind of like within panels, like a graphic novel, and I just like it gave this very cool heist vibe that I really appreciated. Was that something like visually going into writing this script that was something that you kind of had in the back of your mind that you wanted to convey, or was that something that as you started writing you kind of went visually, I kind of wanted to look like this, or
It didn't actually come until as we were getting closer to production, and Mike Curry, our cinematographer, who I'd worked with on my last project and is absolutely fantastic. We started kind of diving into the visual look of what this film was going to be. And we watched some heist films. And one of us said, hey, like we were watching some old films, and there are these kind of split screen moments and things like that. And we said, maybe we should do some split screen to kind of tap into this heist nostalgia. Because I think that was one of the things that was an ongoing conversation for us is how much do we want to, try and create our own look, and how much do we want to tap into the language of heist films, because there is kind of a built up canon of what a heist film is and how these sequences play out. And so we definitely wanted to make some nods to the heist films that inspired us. And I think the split screen is one of those that we said this helps make it feel like a heist film, and also just it's fun from a storytelling perspective. One of the big things for me on this film that I had to really be focusing on as I was doing it is pacing.
yeah.
And when you're doing a split screen moment, you have to think even more about pacing, because you have to say, okay, this is how this scene is going to be cut in with these other shots in the split screen, and is the pacing all going to work here? Um, and obviously, a lot of that can come in the edit, but you also have to on set be thinking about, all right, if this is going to be a split screen, how is our framing going to work with that? How is our pacing going to work with that? So it was a new challenge, which was a lot of fun.
I will say too, not just visually, but I thought the score is fantastic. It has this really great rhythm, really from jump, that I found it really keeping throughout the whole film. And as things get, a little darker, which there's a couple turns I noticed at the beginning, but some turns that I actually went, wow, okay, like caught me off guard in the best way. Can you talk to me about the score concept as far as like that process as well?
Yeah, this was a really fun one, because I think this was my first time really doing as intensive of a composer search. And so we met with a bunch of composers after we kind of had a first rough cut of the film that we were able to show them, and uh, met with Isabel, our composer, who ended up being our composer. And she just had some great things to say about creating a theme that was going to kind of run throughout. And on the second watch, you'll see there are moments that the same kind of melody gets altered in different ways for different moments,
Okay.
um, which I found to be, a really useful storytelling tool, because it's not in your face, right? We didn't want it to be totally in your face, but we wanted to have those kind of subtle moments where, as you might say, oh, I recognize this theme, but it's this melody, it's a little bit different than the last time I heard it. And that oftentimes kind of lines up with what's happening in the film to kind of help sell different tones throughout the movie, because there it is, there's some tonal changes. The film gets significantly darker towards the end,
Yeah.
uh, and I think the score does a big piece in like not having that feel too abrupt, where you're suddenly like, whoa, this is a totally different movie that we're watching, right? We want it to be a twist, we want it to be unexpected, but it also needs to flow into that in a smooth way. And I think Isabel and the score that she put together was so key in that.
One thing I really like about the film is that nothing feel like it's not twist for the sake of twists. Everything does feel earned, which is always a very tough balance. Like I find for films to strike. So I think you nailed that as well. There's a scene. That's too spoilery. Never mind. uh, I can't ask this. Was there anything on the cutting room floor that you were like, damn, I wish we could have gotten that in, but anything that you just had to cut that you just went, this doesn't fit the rhythm, or was there anything like that that you had to cut that you were a little mad that you had to cut?
Yeah, I mean, there were, leaving stuff on the cutting room floor is always hard. And there were a couple scenes that visually I absolutely loved. And it came back to pacing, right? It came back to, we had them in the original rough cuts of the film, and they were during kind of heist sequences. And people said, it just doesn't flow with the heist sequence that you're building. And they were right. As soon as we cut them out, suddenly the flow was much better. It got much tighter. And we were able, the information in those scenes, we were able to, convey in other ways, and it worked just fine. And so it is one of those, you spend so much time, and especially when you're on set with a shot and you fall in love with it, and you go, oh, the lighting here is perfect. This looks so good. So then in the edit, be like, but the pacing just doesn't work for the film. To leave it on the cutting room floor is tough. Um, but at the end of the day, you kind of have to say what is best for the storytelling here.
When it came down to the runtime, because I think this is like 90, it's like 92 minutes, 90, like
I think it's
94.
just
It's like,
under 90. It's
yeah,
tight
I think
90. Yeah.
it's like right there. Was there a big discussion on the runtime? Like as you were writing the film, were you picturing like an hour and a half or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the shooting script was like 102 pages. And so this ran, tighter than the shooting script. And that was partially just the pacing of how our actors talk in some of those scenes. I'm a big believer that like having a nice, tight 90-minute film, is accessible, and that's one of my big things
I
in,
agree.
in filmmaking is I want a movie that like I can recommend to just about anybody and they can go and enjoy. And like, some people will take out a lot of the themes and messages from it. But even if you just want to Friday night, turn off your brain, eat some popcorn, have some fun, hopefully that movie's this as well. Um, and so yeah, that was one of the big things for me was I wanted something that was accessible. And for me, I think a 90-minute movie, and also just it felt right. Like if we needed more time, I think we would have added more time.
Yeah.
But we got to 90 minutes and said, this feels right. This feels like the story we want to tell can be done in 90 minutes. So why add to that?
Yeah, I really I think that's something that I think in Hollywood in general is just being kind of lost. Like it's almost like a people kind of see it as a detriment doing only a 90-minute film. Like I think if you can tell your story in 90 minutes and not overstay your welcome, like there's no shame in that. And honestly, by the time I got to the end of the film and where it ended up, I went, yeah. I was like, this didn't need to overstay its welcome. I was like, this is like a well told full story from start to finish in this runtime. So yeah, so I completely agree with you 1,000% on that. A couple more questions here. So obviously this is your first feature film, and taking on a heist film in general, like at any point in your career, that's not an easy thing. But for you, so I mean, the fact that you're able to pull this off, just props to you again. Um, Genre-wise, moving forward, are there any genres that you're like, oh, like I want to tackle horror film, I want to go sci-fi? Like, is there a roadmap that you kind of want to follow directing wise, or are you just kind of letting inspiration hit you?
I mean, it's definitely, a little bit of, I'm a big believer in follow your passions in the moment. And so the script that excites you is the next one you should do. But I will say, definitely want to do, I would love to do a kind of feature version of On the Whistle, which was a basketball sports film.
Oh
Um, you know,
yeah.
initially was aiming to do that. And the budget challenges of doing a basketball film with all those extras, and it
Mm,
became infeasible for a first feature, but really would love to make that at some point. Um, and then also had have a fugitive film that would love to do, have a
nice.
historical piece. So I think it's really, for me, it comes down to the story and what the story that I'm trying to tell is. And I think genre is really important for helping expose it to an audience, right? Like for us, the big piece about this being a heist film beyond just I love heist films of the past is as an audience, you know what that is. When I say, hey, this is heist film, they're robbing a health insurance company, you can kind of know what to expect. And I think that is an important way of how we as filmmakers interact with our audiences. But at the same time, you know, I'm less, I'm not really a horror guy. Horror movies scare me a little too much. But beyond that, I think, whatever the genre is that best tells the story that I want to tell, I think I can hopefully be adaptable to different genres.
Okay, and I will say, like, I've been getting a little bit more into horror, but I cover my eyes on shit still, so no judgment there. Um, I will say, as we get to the last question here, um, I was really excited to watch this. I was really excited after I finished it because I was like, oh, I can't wait till I already did my review last night, but I'm like, oh, I get to be able to tell people about this indie film that they should support. Being the writer, being the director, um, taking on both jobs, like that's not like one of them is not easy, let alone doing both. And it being for your first time. Is there a certain message that you want your audience to take away once the credits have rolled?
Um, I mean, I think it goes back to the theme that conversation with Ricky and Claire and talking about, in a perfect world, we're all able to find a balance where we find a career or a job or whatever it is that is both financially rewarding and morally fulfilling. Um, but I think giving some thought to like finding that balance and, on either side, sometimes you can find something. And I think that goes to movies too. Like you can find a movie that has all the themes and messaging that you want, but isn't commercial at all and isn't going to do well at the box office. We also have films at the box office that do great, but don't really have much to say. And so I think I don't necessarily have a message on that. I want to inspire conversation and thought about that because that's for me is movies that get me and my friends talking about a theme, get talking about a question. That's what really excites me, and so I'm hoping that Midas can do that for audiences around the country.
Love that. And I lied. I have one more follow-up for you. With your work with the Hartford Film Company, um, and I promise this is my last question. Is there a piece of advice you would give someone who watches this, reads up on you, and goes, "Damn, I want to do that"? Is there a piece of advice that you would give them that you wish you would have known, like before you started getting into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think my two big pieces of advice are one is, you got to do it. That was a big thing for me. And there were different points in my career where, I've had this idea and said, okay, I'm gonna wait till, have all the pieces fall into place and have the perfect scenario to make this movie. And the answer is you're never gonna have the perfect scenario. So like you
Mhm.
have to, you don't want to rush into it. And I think that having a team of people around you who you trust and can tell you, yep, this is ready to go, this is worth doing, or no, wait a little bit longer and get these other pieces in place. I think that's really important. But at the end of the day, I say, you should go do it and make it. Because otherwise you're going to spend, years and years waiting around for the perfect scenario to come fall into place. And then the second thing I'll say, being in Hartford specifically, I think building community is such a key piece of it.
Agreed.
And that's something that we obviously were doing before and have done on Midas. But even since we've really realized that investing in the local filmmaking community, hosting meetups, inviting people to the table and just creating connections is a really important piece of the long-term growth, especially if you're not in a New York or LA where there's, countless number of people in the industry. If you have not as many people in the industry in your town wherever that may be, creating those connections I think is a really important piece of you all thrive when you can work together and help each other on projects.
Well said. I mean, as someone who's not in a major city, I could not agree with you more. I think that's a piece that really gets lost in the shuffle. But TJ, sir, thank you so much for this conversation. This was a great way to start my morning. I haven't even had my coffee and I feel energized. Thank you for that. Can you please tell people where they can find you on socials and then where they can go ahead and watch the film when it comes out?
Absolutely. So you can find us on socials at Hartford Film on all socials. You also follow me at TJ Noel-Sullivan, Sullivan on all socials. And the film will be playing in select theaters across the country starting this Friday, June 28th. Will be Hartford, New York, and LA already have sold out opening nights, but we'll
Hell
have
yeah.
screenings. And you can go to hartfordfilm.com/Midas to see the full list of all the theaters it's playing at.
Awesome. I will definitely tag you when I get my review up on Friday. Like I said, people, you know me, I don't I don't bullshit y'all, and I had such joy watching this. It really is fun, and I think it's gonna really inspire some deeper conversations if you want to dig that deep. And to your point, TJ, if you want to just have a nice popcorn flick, it definitely fills that void as well. But TJ, good luck to you on this film. I can't wait to see what you do next. And again, thank you so much for making the time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Anytime, so you take care.